The alarm cut through the darkness at 5:30, and Garrett Ashford's hand found the button before his eyes opened. Muscle memory from 16 years of pre-dawn briefings of operations that started when most people still dreamed. He lay still for 3 seconds, listening to the house settle around him, then swung his legs out of bed and stood. The floor was cold under his bare feet. Spring in New Hampshire came late and left early, and the morning still carried winter's bite. He moved through the routine without thinking. Shower-shaved jeans and a gray Henley that had seen better days. The watch went on last, scratched and dented, the kind of timepiece that couldn't be bought in any store. Military issue. The crystal was spider-webbed in the upper left corner from an impact he no longer remembered, but the second hand still swept smooth and true. He checked the time against his phone. 6:03. The watch was 11 seconds fast, same as always. Down the hall, Nora's door stood half open. She slept with one arm thrown over her head, tangled in sheets decorated with stars and moons she'd picked out 3 years ago and refused to replace. 12 years old, going on 20, she'd told him last week she was too old for celestial patterns, but when he'd offered to buy new ones, she'd backtracked. Garrett stood in the doorway and watched her breathe steady and deep, the rise and fall of her chest that never stopped being a miracle. 6 years since Rebecca died. 6 years of doing this alone, and he still woke some nights in a panic, convinced he'd failed at the only mission that truly mattered. The kitchen was small and dated all original 1920s cabinetry that he'd refinished himself, stripping decades of paint down to bare oak. He made coffee in the French press Rebecca had insisted on buying back when they'd first moved in, and everything felt possible. The water boiled, the grounds bloomed, and 4 minutes later he was wrapping both hands around a mug of something strong enough to strip paint. He drank it black, standing at the window that looked out over the backyard. The swing set still stood where he'd built it when Nora was 4, rusted now, and unused, a monument to a childhood that was slipping away faster than he could track. His phone buzzed against the counter. A text from Hayes' quiet night. Nothing to report. Garrett typed back with one thumb, "Appreciate the update." Lieutenant Michael Hayes had been running periodic patrols past the house for the last month, ever since Dalton Voss had walked into the police station and asked casual, as ordering coffee, whether Garrett Ashford still lived in town. Hayes had been a Marine corporal once before the police academy, and he understood the kind of grudge that outlasted discharge papers and therapy sessions. He'd pulled Garrett aside after morning coffee one day and laid it out plain. Voss was asking questions, and questions like that rarely stayed theoretical. Garrett set the phone down and finished his coffee. The house creaked around him, old wood settling pipes expanding as the furnace kicked on. He'd bought this place with Rebecca when they'd still believed deployment schedules were temporary inconveniences, when the plan had been for him to finish his 20 and retire into something normal. Carpentry, maybe. Teaching high school shop class. Something that didn't require him to be gone 8 months out of 12, missing birthdays and holidays and the 1,000 small moments that stitched a marriage together. Cancer had rewritten that plan. Fast and brutal, the doctors had said, which was their way of admitting they couldn't do a damn thing about it. Stage 4, by the time symptoms showed, metastasized beyond surgery, beyond treatment, beyond anything except morphine and waiting. He'd been in Kandahar when the diagnosis came through, made it home in 48 hours and spent the next 11 weeks watching her fade, holding her hand, lying to her about how good she looked when they both knew the truth. 3 weeks after the funeral, he'd walked into his CO's office and submitted his resignation. No one had tried to talk him out of it. They understood what Nora needed, what he needed, what staying in would cost them both. 16 years of service, multiple commendations. The kind of record that made early retirement look reasonable instead of desperate. He'd cleaned out his locker, turned in his gear, and driven home to figure out how to be a single father with no training manual and no backup. 6 years later, he still didn't have all the answers. But Nora was alive and healthy and sleeping down the hall, and that counted for something. At 7:15, he climbed the stairs and knocked on her door. No response. He knocked again, louder, and heard a groan from inside. Her voice came muffled through the pillow. 5 more minutes. He pushed the door open. She hadn't moved, still sprawled across the bed like gravity had failed. 5 minutes turns into 10, and 10 turns into late. Up! Another groan, but she rolled over and squinted at him through sleep-sticky eyes. Her hair was a disaster dark brown and tangled the same shade Rebecca's had been. She had her mother's cheekbones too, the delicate architecture that would break hearts in a few years, though Garrett tried not to think about that particular future. "It's Saturday," she mumbled, "and you have soccer at 9. I hate soccer. You begged me to sign you up." "That was last year. I've evolved." He crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Evolution doesn't exempt you from commitment. You signed up for spring season, you play spring season? Up." She sat up, sheets falling away, wearing an oversized t-shirt she'd stolen from his drawer. "Can I at least have pancakes? After you shower and brush your teeth?" "That's bribery. That's parenting." She threw a pillow at him. He caught it one-handed and tossed it back, and she was grinning now, the last traces of sleep falling away. This was their routine, the rhythm they'd built together over 6 years of figuring each other out. Negotiation disguised as argument, boundaries wrapped in banter. She climbed out of bed and shuffled toward the bathroom, and he went back downstairs to start the pancakes. By 8:30, they were in his truck, an old Ford Ranger, with 200,000 miles and a transmission that slipped in third gear. Nora sat in the passenger seat, soccer bag at her feet, earbuds in but volume low enough that he could tell she wasn't really listening. The town rolled past the windows, small and quiet, the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to disappear from whatever they'd left behind. Garrett had chosen it for exactly that reason. No one here knew about the missions, the deployments, the classified operations that still woke him at 3 in the morning, with his heart hammering and sweat soaking the sheets. He dropped her at the soccer complex and watched her jog toward the field where her team was already warming up. She moved with easy confidence, long legs eating up the ground, ponytail swinging. A few of the other girls called her name, and she waved, and then she was absorbed into the group, indistinguishable from any other 12-year-old, whose biggest concern was whether she'd start or sit the bench. Garrett pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward Riverside Café, the same route he drove every Saturday morning. Coffee, an hour of peace, then back to pick her up at 10:30. It was a small ritual, predictable and safe, the kind of normalcy he'd craved his entire adult life without realizing it. The cafe sat on a corner lot, red brick and tall windows, the kind of building that had been something else once before someone gutted it and filled it with reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs. It opened at 7 on weekends, catering to early risers and insomniacs, and by 8:45, it was already half full. Garrett pushed through the door, and the smell hit him immediately: dark roast and fresh pastries, cinnamon and butter and yeast. His stomach reminded him that 2 pancakes hadn't been nearly enough. He scanned the room automatically, cataloging exits and sightlines before his conscious mind caught up. The corner booth was open, same as always. He headed for it, weaving between tables where people hunched over laptops or bent close in conversation. No one looked up. He was good at being invisible when he wanted to be, a skill that had kept him alive in places where visibility meant death. The booth put his back to the wall and gave him clean view of the entrance and the entire dining area. He slid in and set his phone on the table, face down. The watch on his left wrist caught the morning light slanting through the windows, the scratched crystal throwing tiny rainbows across the worn laminate. Tessa appeared with a pot of coffee and a smile that was genuine, despite the early hour. Early 20s art school dropout, she'd told him once, working here while she figured out what came next. She had the kind of optimism that hadn't been ground down yet, and Garrett liked her for it. "The usual," he nodded. She poured steam, rising between them, and he wrapped his hands around the mug before it was even full. The heat seeped through ceramic into his palms, anchoring him to this moment, this place, this version of himself that was just a guy drinking coffee on a Saturday morning. Tessa moved on to the next table, and Garrett sat with his coffee, not reading, not scrolling through his phone, just present, aware of every movement in the room without appearing to notice any of it. The couple by the window arguing in whispers. The college kid in the corner with headphones on, nodding to a beat no one else could hear. The old man 2 tables over, flannel shirt and weathered hands, working through the crossword with a pencil worn down to a nub. The door opened, and Bryn Caldwell rolled in wheelchair, navigating the threshold with practiced ease. She came most Saturdays, always around 9, always alone. Garrett knew her name only because he'd overheard Tessa use it once, asking if she wanted her usual table by the outlet where she could plug in her laptop. She was 28 or 29, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dressed in clothes that prioritized function over fashion. She had the kind of face that would have been striking if she'd bothered with makeup, but she didn't, and Garrett respected that. No pretense. No performance. She wheeled to her usual spot and transferred from chair to booth with efficient movements that spoke to years of repetition. The wheelchair folded with a practiced flick of her wrists, tucked beside the table where it wouldn't block traffic. She pulled out her laptop and a notebook, spreading them across the surface with the focused intent of someone who had work to do and limited time to do it. Garrett had never spoken to her beyond the occasional nod of acknowledgement. She'd never spoken to him. They existed in parallel, two regulars who valued their solitude, and that was enough. He was halfway through his second cup when the door opened again, and the temperature in the room dropped. Dalton Voss walked in like he owned the place, broad shoulders and leather jacket, moving with the kind of swagger that announced itself 3 steps ahead. Late 30s, tall enough to make average-sized men feel small, with the kind of face that might have been handsome if it wasn't twisted around anger and entitlement. 2 men flanked him, one massive shoulders like a linebacker neck thick as Garrett's thigh. The other smaller and wiry, ferret-faced, the kind of guy who talked too much and thought it made him smart. Garrett recognized Dalton instantly. 9 years since their last face-to-face, but some people burn themselves into your memory, whether you wanted them there or not. The bar went quiet, not all at once, but in a wave as people noticed, and decided consciously or not, that making themselves small was the smart play. Dalton scanned the room slow and deliberate, and his eyes snagged on Bryn. Something shifted in his expression. Not recognition. Something uglier. He changed trajectory mid-stride and headed straight for her table. Garrett's hand tightened around his mug, but he didn't move. Not yet. Not unless it became necessary. Dalton reached Bryn's table and stopped. She was focused on her screen fingers, flying across the keyboard, completely unaware or deliberately ignoring him. Dalton smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had nothing to do with humor. "Excuse me." Bryn didn't look up. Dalton leaned in, invading the space above her table. "I said excuse me." This time she looked up, and Garrett saw the exact moment she recognized the situation for what it was. Her expression went carefully neutral, the mask people learned to wear when confrontation was inevitable, and escape wasn't an option. "Can I help you?" Dalton gestured at the booth. "You're taking up a lot of space here. 4-person table, just you. Seems selfish." The cafe had gone completely silent now. Even the espresso machine seemed to be holding its breath. Bryn's voice stayed level. "There are other tables available, but I like this one. Then I'm sure you'll enjoy it when I leave in an hour." Dalton's smile widened. He turned to his friends playing to an audience. "You hear that, an hour? Like she owns the place." The big one laughed, a sound like rocks in a garbage disposal. The ferret-faced one grinned, showing too many teeth. Dalton turned back to Bryn, and his hands shot out faster than Garrett expected, slamming down on the table hard enough to make her coffee jump. Liquid sloshed over the rim, spreading across the table in a dark stain that crept toward her laptop. She jerked back, hands up, and her chair rolled a few inches before hitting the wall. "Whoops." Dalton's voice dripped false apology. "Clumsy me." Bryn grabbed napkins, trying to save her laptop, but the coffee was already seeping into the keyboard. Her face had gone white, anger and fear warring for dominance, and she was losing the fight to stay calm. Garrett set his mug down and stood. The movement drew every eye in the room. Dalton's gaze swung toward him, and recognition hit like a physical blow. Dalton's face went through surprise, then rage, then something close to joy, all in the span of 2 seconds. "Well, well." Dalton spread his arms wide, an invitation and a threat. "Garrett fucking Ashford." Garrett walked toward them, not fast, not slow. Measured, controlled. The way you approached a tripwire you knew was there, but couldn't see. "You need to walk away." His voice was low, each word deliberate, and it cut through the silence like a blade. Dalton blinked, thrown by the calm, by the absolute absence of fear or aggression. He'd expected anger. Expected a reaction he could feed off, could use as fuel. Dalton recovered fast, forcing a laugh. "Or what you going to make me?" Garrett stopped 3 feet away, close enough to act far enough to give Dalton a choice. "I'm asking you to leave her alone." "Asking?" Dalton tasted the word, rolling it around. "That's polite. Very polite. Very different from the guy I remember. The guy who left my brother to die." The air went electric. Garrett's expression didn't change, but something in his stillness shifted like a fault line settling before the quake. Vincent made a choice. He saved 8 men. He died screaming. He died a hero. Dalton's face twisted. Don't you fucking dare. Don't you stand there and talk about my brother like you knew him. Like you cared. You left him. You aborted the mission, and you left him behind, and you came home, and he didn't. Garrett absorbed it all, let it wash over him. He'd heard it before in his own head in the dark hours when sleep wouldn't come. The difference was that he'd made peace with the choice, or as close to peace as anyone ever got, with decisions made under fire, with incomplete information, and lives hanging in the balance. This isn't about Vincent. This is about you looking for a fight. Maybe I am. Dalton stepped closer, chest to chest, now invading the space between them, until Garrett could smell the whiskey on his breath. Day drinking at 9 in the morning. That explains some of the recklessness. You got a problem with that. Garrett didn't move, didn't step back, didn't square up, just stood there with the kind of patience that came from knowing exactly how this would end if it went wrong. Walk away, last time I'm saying it. Dalton's hand came up and shoved Garrett's shoulder heel of the palm, driving hard into the joint, testing, provoking, begging for escalation. Garrett absorbed the impact, his body rocking back slightly before settling. He didn't shove back, didn't grab Dalton's wrist, just stood and let the moment breathe. Behind the counter, Tessa had her phone pressed to her ear lips, moving silently. Good. Let the police come. Let them sort this out. Garrett could wait. He was excellent at waiting, but Dalton wasn't. The second shove came harder. Both hands against Garrett's chest meant to drive him back into the wall. Garrett moved with it, taking 2 controlled steps backward, using the momentum to create distance instead of resistance. His spine touched brick, and he stopped waiting. Come on! Dalton's voice cracked, spit flying. Do something, hit me, I know you want to. Garrett didn't want to. That was the thing Dalton couldn't understand, the fundamental miscalculation at the heart of this entire confrontation. Garrett had nothing to prove, no ego investment in dominance or saving face. He'd already won more fights than Dalton would ever know about, survived things that would have broken most men. He was done proving himself to anyone. But Dalton was committed now. Too far in to back down, not with his friends watching, not with phones probably recording, not with his pride wrapped around his throat like a noose. He threw the punch. Wide looping hook telegraphed from 3 feet out, the kind of punch someone threw when they'd never been trained, when they'd learned to fight from movies and bar brawls instead of men who understood violence as a language with grammar and syntax. Garrett saw it coming from a mile away, had time to think, time to choose, time to calculate exactly how this would end. He could duck, let the punch sail overhead, let Dalton stumble forward off balance, and walk away while he recovered. But that wouldn't end this. Dalton would come back, would escalate, would hurt someone eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not Garrett, but someone. So Garrett moved, not dramatic, not flashy, just precise. He shifted his weight to his left foot and turned his shoulders, slipping inside Dalton's guard as the punch passed through the space where his head had been a heartbeat before. His left hand came up and caught Dalton's extended wrist fingers, wrapping around bone and tendon with exactly enough pressure. His right hand locked onto Dalton's elbow thumb, finding the nerve cluster on the inside of the joint. Basic control hold. The kind taught in every military combative's course, the kind that worked because they relied on leverage and anatomy instead of raw strength. Garrett rotated Dalton's arm. Not hard, not fast. Just firm and controlled, following the natural range of motion until resistance became compliance. Dalton's body followed because it had no choice. The shoulder joint only moved in certain directions. Fight it and something tore. Follow it and you stayed intact. 3 seconds. That's all it took. 3 seconds and Dalton was facing the wall, right arm pinned behind his back at an angle that made movement impossible without dislocation. His left hand was pressed flat against brick, supporting his weight, and Garrett stood behind him, close, controlling the angle, with micro adjustments that looked effortless, but were the product of thousands of hours of training. Dalton struggled, muscles tensing, trying to push back, trying to twist free. Garrett increased pressure just enough to freeze him in place, not enough to damage, just enough to send a very clear message: keep fighting, and this gets worse. Stop moving. Dusturni, Garrett's voice was calm, almost gentle. You're going to hurt yourself. The cafe had gone absolutely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the espresso machine seemed to have stopped breathing. Tessa stood behind the counter with her phone still pressed to her earmouth, slightly open. The college kid in the corner had lowered his phone, face pale. The old man in the flannel shirt sat with his crossword forgotten, one hand pressed against his heart. They'd expected a brawl. Expected shouting, wild swings, broken furniture. They hadn't expected efficiency, control. A man who moved like violence was a language he'd spoken so long, it required no thought, no effort, no emotion. Garrett held Dalton against the wall and waited. Waited for the fight to drain out of him. Waited for reality to sink in. Waited for the moment when Dalton understood that he'd made a very serious mistake about the quiet man in the corner booth. It took longer than Garrett expected. Dalton kept struggling, kept testing the hold, kept refusing to accept what was happening. But eventually, inevitably, the fight drained out of him all at once like air escaping a punctured tire. His muscles went slack. His breathing turned ragged. Garrett felt the shift, felt the moment when resistance became compliance. He held the position for 3 more seconds, long enough to be absolutely sure, then released the pressure and stepped back. Dalton turned around slowly, face flushed, eyes wide. He looked at Garrett like he was seeing him for the first time, like the last 30 seconds had rewritten everything he thought he understood about the world. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. Garrett put distance between them, 2 steps, then 3. He moved to the side so he wasn't blocking Dalton against the wall, giving him space, giving him an exit. The positioning was deliberate, non-threatening. Garrett's hands hung loose at his sides, weight-centered. He wasn't pursuing, wasn't pressing, just holding the boundary he'd set. Sirens cut through the silence, faint at first, then louder, growing closer. Dalton's head snapped toward the sound. Panic flickered across his face. He looked at Garrett, looked at the door, looked back at Garrett. Garrett shook his head once. Small movement. Clear message, don't run. Dalton stayed where he was. 2 police cruisers pulled up outside, lights flashing. 4 officers came through the door, moving with the kind of careful speed that said they'd been told there was an active fight, that someone might be hurt, that the situation might still be escalating. The first officer through the door was young, late 20s. Blonde hair pulled back tight. Her hand rested on her belt near her radio, not on her weapon, but close enough to matter. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the crowd, the phones, the 2 men near the back wall. The second officer was older, 50, maybe 55, gray, at his temples, weathered face that had seen too many Saturday morning calls exactly like this one. His name tag read Hayes. He moved slower than his partner, more deliberate, and his eyes found Garrett first and stayed there. Something passed across his face. Recognition. Maybe concern. He said something quietly to the younger officer. She nodded and moved toward Dalton. Hayes walked toward Garrett. His posture was relaxed but alert, the walk of someone who'd done this enough times to know that assumptions could get you hurt. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to react if he needed to. You want to tell me what happened here? Garrett met his eyes directly. Didn't look away, didn't fidget, didn't rush to explain or defend himself. Just stood there and let Hayes assess him. He knocked over her table. Garrett gestured toward Bryn, still sitting in her booth laptop, dripping coffee onto her lap. Deliberately. Then he took a swing. Hayes looked at the table, looked at the stains spreading across the laminate, looked back at Garrett's face. His eyes dropped briefly to the watch on Garrett's wrist. Standard military issue. The kind you couldn't buy in stores. The kind you earned. Hayes's expression shifted slightly. Not much. Just enough. And what did you do? Restrained him. Didn't hit him. Didn't hurt him. Just held him until he stopped. Hayes looked over his shoulder. The younger officer had Dalton against a different wall. Now different position, but the same defeated posture. She was talking to him in a low voice, taking his ID. Dalton was cooperating, all the fight gone out of him. Tessa appeared at Hayes' shoulder phone, still in hand. Her voice shook slightly. That's true. That guy, she pointed at Dalton, came in and went straight for her. She pointed at Bryn. Knocked her table on purpose, started pushing him. She pointed at Garrett. Everyone saw it. The old man in the flannel shirt stood and walked over. His voice was rough from a lifetime of cigarettes or hard work or both. She's right. The big guy started it. This one here just defended himself. Didn't do more than he had to. Hayes looked at Garrett again. Really looked this time. Took in the way he stood, the way he held himself, the way his eyes tracked movement without his head turning. The watch, the faded clothes, the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. You ex-military? It wasn't really a question. It was confirmation. Garrett nodded once. What branch? Navy. How long? 16 years. Hayes waited. When Garrett didn't offer more, he didn't push. He just nodded like he'd gotten exactly the answer he expected. He turned toward his partner and gave a small hand signal. She nodded back and started walking Dalton toward the door. Dalton's voice cracked on the question, "Am I being arrested?" The younger officer's voice was professionally neutral. "You're being removed for disturbing the peace. We'll talk outside." Dalton looked back at Garrett one more time. His expression was complicated. Fear, embarrassment, maybe something that looked almost like respect. He didn't say anything. Just turned and walked out with the officer's hand on his elbow. Hayes watched them go, then turned back to Garrett. "You want to press charges?" Garrett shook his head. "You want a report filed?" Another shake. "You sure we've got witnesses? We probably got video." Hayes glanced at the college kid in the corner, who still had his phone out. "We could make a case if you wanted." "I'm sure. I just want to go home." Hayes studied him for a long moment, then pulled a card from his pocket and held it out. "If he comes back around, you call me." Garrett took the card and slipped it into his back pocket without looking at it. Hayes reached out and offered his hand. Garrett shook it. The grip was firm mutual respect between two men who'd both seen things they didn't talk about. "Thank you for your service." Hayes said it quietly, meant for Garrett alone, then louder to the room. "Anyone who recorded video of this incident, I need you to delete it right now. This is not entertainment. This is not content. Someone could have been seriously hurt." The college kid looked down at his phone. He tapped the screen a few times and held it up to show Hayes. The video was gone. A few other people around the cafe did the same deleting, confirming. Hayes nodded his appreciation. He looked at Garrett one more time, tipped his head slightly in acknowledgement, and walked out. The door closed behind him. The lights from the cruisers faded as they pulled away. The cafe exhaled. Conversation started again quietly at first, then louder. People returned to their coffee, their laptops, their Saturday mornings. But the atmosphere had changed. There was a different quality to the air, now a lesson that no one had asked for, but everyone had received. Tessa came over with a towel and handed it to Garrett without saying anything. He took it, wiped the coffee off his jeans where Dalton had knocked his table earlier, and dropped the towel on his booth. His mug was still there, coffee gone cold. He looked at his watch. 9:47. He had time before he needed to pick up Nora, but he didn't want to stay here anymore. Didn't want to be looked at. Didn't want questions. He walked to the counter. Tessa was back behind it now, her hands steadier than before. "How much for the coffee?" She shook her head. "It's on the house. I'd rather pay." She looked at him, really looked, then nodded, understanding that he needed this to feel normal. $3.50. Garrett pulled out his wallet, gave her a $5, told her to keep the change. She smiled. Small but genuine. "Thank you for not making it worse." Garrett didn't respond, just nodded and turned toward the door. The old man in the flannel shirt caught his eye as he passed. He raised his coffee cup slightly. A salute, a gesture of respect from one man to another. Garrett returned the nod and kept walking. Outside, the air was crisp and clean. Early spring in New Hampshire, the sun bright but not warm yet. He walked to his truck, climbed in, sat behind the wheel for a moment, looking at the cafe through the windshield. People were still inside, still drinking coffee, still living their lives. The moment had passed. Dalton was gone. The police were gone. Everything was returning to normal, except it wasn't really normal. Not anymore. Because Hayes had pulled him aside on the way out, voice low, words careful. "Dalton Voss walked into the station 3 days ago and asked if you still lived in town. By name, address, everything. I thought you should know." And then Hayes had added, quieter still, "He just got out of county 2 weeks ago. Assault with a deadly weapon. 5 years served. And before you ask, no, I don't think this was random. Whatever history you two have, it's not finished." Garrett started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was already running scenarios, threat assessments, contingency plans. The things you never stopped doing once you'd been trained to think that way. Dalton Voss, Vincent's younger brother, the one who'd shown up drunk at Vincent's funeral and screamed at Garrett in front of 200 people, calling him a murderer, a coward, a traitor who'd left good men to die. Security had removed him before he could throw the punch he was winding up for, and that had been the last time Garrett had seen him. 9 years ago, and now he was out of prison asking about Garrett showing up at his cafe starting fights. This wasn't over. Hayes was right about that. Garrett drove through the quiet streets toward the soccer complex, past the hardware store where he bought wood and screws for his projects, past the elementary school where Nora had learned to read, past the cemetery where Rebecca was buried under a simple granite headstone. He didn't stop at the cemetery today. Sometimes he did, sitting there for hours talking to a woman who could no longer answer, but not today. Today he needed to pick up his daughter and take her home and pretend that everything was fine, that the past wasn't catching up, that old ghosts stayed buried. The soccer complex was chaos when he arrived. Games ending new games, starting parents everywhere with folding chairs and coolers. He spotted Nora on the sideline talking to Emma Rodriguez, her best friend since second grade. She saw his truck and waved that big enthusiastic wave she hadn't yet learned to be embarrassed by. He waved back, and she said something to Emma, grabbed her bag, and jogged over. She climbed in slightly out of breath, face flushed from running. "How'd it go?" "We won 3-2. I got an assist." "That's my girl." She grinned, pulling her seatbelt across. "Can we get pizza for lunch?" "We have leftovers at home." "Pizza is better." "Pizza is expensive." "You're such a dad." "That's literally my job." She laughed and pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages from her team group chat. Garrett pulled out of the parking lot and headed home, and for a few minutes it felt normal. Just a father and daughter on a Saturday morning, talking about nothing important, the world small and safe and manageable. But his phone buzzed in the cup holder, and when he glanced down at a red light, he saw a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Enjoyed our talk this morning. We should do it again sometime." D.V. Garrett deleted it without responding and set the phone back down. Nora looked up from her screen. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine." She studied him with the kind of perception that 12-year-olds shouldn't have, but often did. "You're lying." "I'm handling something. You don't need to worry." "That's what you said last month when the furnace broke." "And did you need to worry?" "No, but..." "Then trust me." She fell silent, but she was still watching him, reading the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. She was too smart for her own good sometimes, too observant, too much like her mother. They drove the rest of the way in silence, and when they got home, Garrett made her a sandwich she didn't ask for and watched her eat it while pretending to read the news on his phone. But he wasn't reading. He was thinking about Dalton, about Vincent, about choices made under fire, and consequences that outlasted discharge papers. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the same number. "Nice kid. Soccer, right, picks up at 3:15 on weekdays?" Garrett's hand tightened around the phone hard enough that the case creaked. Nora looked up. "Dad," he forced his expression neutral. "Nothing. Just work." But it wasn't nothing, and Nora knew it. And somewhere across town, Dalton Voss was making it very clear that this was only beginning. Garrett sat in his truck outside the house for 10 minutes after they got home, watching Nora disappear inside through the rearview mirror. The text burned in his pocket like a live coal. He pulled it out and read it again, the words no less threatening the third time through. "Nice kid. Soccer, right. Picks up at 3:15 on weekdays." Dalton knew where Nora went to school, knew her schedule, had probably been watching for days, cataloging routines, identifying vulnerabilities. It was exactly what Garrett would do if he were running surveillance on a target, which meant Dalton had training discipline, patience, all the things that made a threat credible instead of just noise. He got out of the truck and walked the perimeter of the property before going inside. Checked the fence line, the gate latch, the sight lines from the street. The house sat on a quarter-acre with neighbors close enough to hear shouting, but not close enough to see into the backyard. Windows faced south and west, curtains that needed replacing. Too much glass, too many angles. Inside, Nora was already upstairs, music leaking from under her door. Garrett stood in the kitchen and called Hayes. 3 rings then, Lieutenant Hayes. "It's Garrett Ashford." Dalton sent me a text 20 minutes ago, mentioned my daughter by name, her school, her schedule. Silence on the other end, the kind that meant Hayes was thinking, calculating, deciding how seriously to take this. You still have the message? Yes. Forward it to me. I'll run his number, see if it's registered or a burner. Either way, this is escalation. Harassment at minimum, possibly stalking, depending on how much contact he initiates. What can you actually do about it? Hayes exhaled and Garrett heard the frustration in it. Not much until he does something actionable. Sending a text isn't a crime. Mentioning your daughter isn't a threat unless he explicitly threatens harm. Best I can do is increase patrols in your area, maybe have a conversation with him about staying clear. That'll just piss him off. Probably, but it puts him on notice that we're watching. Sometimes that's enough. Garrett doubted it. Men like Dalton didn't respond to warnings. They responded to consequences, and consequences required action, and action was exactly what Dalton wanted. An excuse, a justification. Proof that Garrett was the aggressor, that whatever came next was self-defense. I need to know what he did 5 years for. The assault charge. Hayes was quiet for a beat too long. You don't want to know. Tell me anyway. Another pause, then Hayes spoke slowly, choosing words with care. Bar fight. Started over, a woman ended with Dalton putting a broken bottle through a guy's shoulder, severed an artery. Victim almost bled out on the floor. Dalton claimed self-defense, said the guy swung first, but 3 witnesses said otherwise. Jury convicted on assault with a deadly weapon. Judge gave him 7 years, served 5 for good behavior. Garrett processed that. Severed artery. That wasn't bar fight violence. That was deliberate, targeted. The kind of injury you inflicted when you wanted someone to bleed to suffer, to carry a reminder for the rest of their life. He have any other priors? Disorderly conduct when he was 23. Public intoxication twice. Domestic disturbance call from an ex-girlfriend 8 years ago, but she wouldn't press charges. Guy's got a pattern, but nothing that stuck until the bottle incident. What about military service? Marines. Served 6 years, got out with a general discharge. Files sealed, but general usually means something happened that wasn't bad enough for dishonorable, but wasn't good enough for honorable. My guess, disciplinary issues. Insubordination. Maybe substance abuse. Garrett thanked him and ended the call. He stood in the kitchen and stared at the refrigerator covered in Nora's drawings from elementary school, fading now held up by magnets shaped like fruit. She'd drawn a family, once stick figures, holding hands, Mom, Dad, Nora, and a dog they'd never actually owned. Rebecca had kept that one on the fridge until the day she died, and Garrett hadn't been able to take it down after. His phone buzzed. Another text from Dalton. No response. That's rude. I thought SEALs had better manners. Garrett turned the phone off and set it on the counter. Engaging was what Dalton wanted. Reaction meant leverage, and leverage meant control. Better to go silent, force Dalton to escalate on his own timeline, instead of being pulled into a rhythm someone else was setting. Upstairs, Nora's music stopped. He heard her door open, footsteps in the hall, then her voice from the landing. Dad, you okay down there? Fine, just checking messages. She appeared at the top of the stairs, still in her soccer clothes, ponytail coming loose. You've been standing there for like 5 minutes. Thinking. About what? About how to keep you safe without scaring you. About whether to send you away until this blows over. About whether anything ever really blows over, or if it just goes underground and waits. About what to make for dinner. She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Liar. You never think that hard about food. We always end up with pasta or chicken. Pasta it is then. Can I invite Emma over? Not tonight. The smile faded. Why not? Because I said so. That's not a reason. It's the only one you're getting. She stared at him, and he watched her, trying to decide whether to push, whether this was worth a fight. She must have seen something in his face that made her recalculate, because she just shrugged and went back to her room. Garrett made pasta because it was easy and required no thought. Boiled water dumped in noodles, heated sauce from a jar. Nora came down when he called her, ate in silence, and went back upstairs without asking to be excused. The house felt too quiet after she left, too big, every creak and settling sound amplified. He washed dishes and checked the locks on every window, tested the deadbolt on the front and back doors, made sure the motion sensor light in the driveway was working. Then he went to the garage and pulled down the lockbox from the shelf above the workbench. The combination spun smooth under his fingers. August 22nd, 2018. Rebecca's birthday. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth, was the Sig Sauer P2 2.6 he'd carried overseas. He hadn't touched it in 6 years, not since he'd cleaned it one last time before putting it away. The weight was familiar in his hand, balanced and solid, and just holding it brought back muscle memory he'd spent years trying to forget. He checked the chamber empty, then the magazine. 15 rounds, brass casings clean and uncorroded. He field stripped it on the workbench, inspecting each component, running a cloth over the barrel and slide. Everything was in order. He reassembled it, loaded the magazine chambered around, and set the safety. Then he stood there holding it, feeling the weight, wondering what the hell he was doing. This wasn't overseas, this wasn't a firefight. This was New Hampshire, his home, his daughter upstairs doing homework or texting friends or whatever 12-year-olds did on Saturday nights. Having a gun didn't make him safer. It made him dangerous, and dangerous was exactly what Dalton wanted him to be. He unloaded the weapon, put it back in the lockbox, spun the combination, and returned it to the shelf. If things got bad enough that he needed a gun, things had already gone too far. Sunday passed without incident. No texts, no calls, no sign of Dalton. Garrett took Nora to the hardware store and let her pick out paint samples for her room, which she'd been asking to repaint for months. She chose a blue that reminded him of the ocean off the coast of Virginia, back when they'd vacationed there before Rebecca got sick. They spent the afternoon taping off trim and rolling primer, working in comfortable silence, broken only by music from Nora's phone. By evening, the first coat was drying, and Nora was sprawled on the couch half asleep in front of some movie Garrett wasn't following. He sat in the chair by the window, watching the street, waiting for headlights that never came. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of weather that made spring feel like a broken promise. Garrett drove Nora to school and watched her disappear into the building, scanning the parking lot for Dalton's truck. Nothing. He waited until the bell rang and the lot emptied before driving away. At home, he tried to work, had a commission for a dining table that needed finishing, but his hands felt clumsy and his measurements kept coming out wrong. He finally gave up and went for a run, pushing hard enough that his lungs burned and his legs turned to rubber. Physical exhaustion didn't quiet his mind, but it made the noise more manageable. His phone rang while he was stretching on the front porch. Unknown number. He answered without speaking. Silence on the other end, just breathing. Then Dalton's voice, low and amused. Ignoring my texts, that hurts, Garrett. I thought we were reconnecting. Garrett hung up and blocked the number. 30 seconds later, another call from a different number. He didn't answer. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. 10 minutes later, another call. Then another. 6 different numbers in an hour, none of them leaving messages. At 2:30, Garrett drove to Nora's school and parked across from the main entrance. He was 45 minutes early, but he wasn't taking chances. Other parents started arriving around 3 minivans and SUVs forming a line along the curb. Garrett stayed where he was watching. At 3:12, Dalton's truck rolled past. Slow cruise windows down, Dalton behind the wheel with that same smirk. He saw Garrett and raised one hand in a lazy wave, then kept driving. Disappeared around the corner and didn't come back. The bell rang. Kids poured out. Nora emerged with Emma laughing about something, completely unaware. She spotted the truck and waved, said goodbye to Emma, jogged over. She climbed in and started talking immediately, something about a science project and a partner who wasn't pulling their weight. Garrett listened with half his attention, the rest focused on the rearview mirror, waiting for Dalton to reappear. They made it home without incident. Nora went upstairs to start homework. Garrett stood at the kitchen window and waited. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. Hayes. Got a call from a Bryn Caldwell. She says someone vandalized her wheelchair ramp last night. Broke 3 of the support brackets, made it unusable. She's stuck on the 2nd floor until her landlord can fix it. Garrett's jaw tightened. When did it happen? Sometime between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. No witnesses, no cameras on that side of the building. But Garrett, here's the thing, she mentioned you. Said you helped her at the cafe, wanted to know if this might be connected. It is. You sure? Dalton's making a point. He can't get to me directly, so he's going after anyone I showed interest in protecting. Hayes was quiet for a moment. That's a reach. Is it? He texts me about my daughter's schedule, shows up at her school, and now Bryn's ramp gets destroyed the same weekend I intervene on her behalf. That's not coincidence. Maybe not, But proving it's a different story, without evidence linking him to the vandalism, my hands are tied. Garrett closed his eyes and counted to 5. What about harassment? The phone calls, different numbers each time, right? Probably burners. Even if we track them, he'll just say he lost his phone, someone must have found it. Unless he makes an explicit threat, we can't touch him. So I'm supposed to just wait until he does something actionable. I didn't say that. I'm saying legally my options are limited. Off the record, you might want to consider sending Nora somewhere safe for a few days. Let this cool down. Garrett thanked him and hung up. He stood at the window until the light faded and Nora called down asking what was for dinner, and he realized he had no idea. Tuesday morning, he drove to Bryn's apartment. She lived in a converted house on the east side second floor, exactly like Hayes had said. The ramp leading to her door hung at an angle, support brackets snapped clean through. Fresh damage splinters still pale where the wood had fractured. He knocked. Heard movement inside, then Bryn's voice through the door. "Who is it?" "Garrett Ashford. From the café." A pause, then locks turning. The door opened and Bryn sat in the doorway. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked exhausted. "I heard about the ramp. Thought I could fix it." She studied him, weighing something. "You think this was your friend from Saturday?" "He's not my friend, but yes." "Why?" "Because I got between him and you. And he's the kind of person who takes that personally." She processed that, then wheeled back and gestured him inside. The apartment was small but organized everything at wheelchair height modifications that spoke to years of adaptation. Her laptop sat on the kitchen table surrounded by scattered papers and coffee cups. "I called the police. They said without proof there's nothing they can do. They told me the same thing. So what, we just wait for him to escalate?" Garrett looked at the laptop at the work she'd been doing. Design schematics, architectural drawings, notes and margins. "What are you working on?" She glanced at the table, hesitant. "Community playground. Accessible design. I'm submitting it for a grant." "That's good work." "It's necessary work. There aren't enough spaces where kids like me, if I'd been hurt as a child, could play without barriers." Garrett nodded slowly. Dalton had chosen his target well. Not just someone Garrett had defended, but someone who represented something worth defending. Proof that protecting the vulnerable was weakness, that caring made you a target. He spent the next 3 hours rebuilding the ramp. Bought new brackets from the hardware store, reinforced the supports, tested every board. Bryn watched from the doorway, asking questions about lumber and load-bearing, and whether this would hold if someone tried to break it again. Garrett showed her the bolts he'd used, industrial grade, the kind that required power tools to remove. When he finished, she wheeled down the ramp and back up, testing the stability. It didn't flex, didn't creak. Solid. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This might just make him angrier." "You think he'll come back?" "I think he's just getting started." She looked at him with an expression he'd seen before in villages overseas, on the faces of civilians caught between forces they couldn't control and didn't understand. The look of someone trying to decide whether hope was worth the risk. "Why are you helping me?" "You don't know me." "Because he's using you to get to me. That makes you collateral damage, and I've seen enough of that for one lifetime." He gave her his number and told her to call if anything else happened, then drove home. Found Nora in the kitchen making a sandwich, and for a moment everything felt normal again. Then his phone buzzed. Text from yet another unknown number. "Nice carpentry work. You always did have good hands. Too bad you couldn't save Vincent with them." Garrett deleted it without responding, but the damage was done. Dalton was watching. Had probably been parked down the street the whole time Garrett was at Bryn's apartment, documenting, cataloging, adding ammunition for whatever endgame he was building toward. Wednesday brought rain, heavy and cold, the kind that turned dirt to mud and made driving treacherous. Garrett took Nora to school through downpour that reduced visibility to 20 feet. Walked her to the door instead of dropping her at the curb, ignoring her protests that she wasn't a baby. Back home, he found an envelope wedged in the doorframe. No stamp, no address, just his name in block letters across the front. Inside was a single photograph. Nora and Emma outside the school, taken from across the street. Yesterday afternoon, based on what Nora was wearing. The angle suggested it had been shot from inside a vehicle, probably with a telephoto lens. Nora's face was circled in red marker, and across the bottom in the same block letters, "Pretty girl." Shame if something happened. Garrett's vision tunneled. The photograph crumpled in his fist before he consciously decided to move. He forced himself to breathe, to think, to not get in his truck and hunt Dalton down like the threat he was. He called Hayes, got voicemail, left a message that came out tighter than he intended. Dalton left a photo of my daughter in my door. Explicit threat. I need you to pick him up. Now. 20 minutes later, Hayes called back. I sent officers to his last known address. He's not there. Landlord says he moved out 2 weeks ago, didn't leave a forwarding. We're looking, but Garrett, he could be anywhere. Then find him. We're trying. In the meantime, I need you to stay calm. Don't engage. Don't go looking for him. He's threatening my daughter. I know, and if you go after him, he'll claim self-defense, and you'll be the one in cuffs. Let us handle this. Garrett hung up and stared at the photograph. Dalton had been outside his house, had stood close enough to slip an envelope in the door. Could have done anything. Could have been there when Garrett was at Bryn's apartment when Nora was home alone. The thought made his hands shake. He called the school, spoke to the principal, a woman named Hutchins who'd been patient with Nora's adjustment after Rebecca died. Explained the situation without giving details, asked if they could keep Nora inside during recess, not let her leave with anyone but him. Hutchins agreed immediately, promised to alert staff, suggested he might want to file a restraining order. Garrett thanked her and hung up, knowing a restraining order was just paper. Paper didn't stop bullets, didn't stop men who'd already decided consequences didn't matter. He spent the afternoon checking sight lines around the house, identifying weaknesses, planning fields of fire, if it came to that. The tactical assessment felt both necessary and insane, like he was preparing for combat in a residential neighborhood where the biggest threat should have been property taxes and HOA violations. At 2:45, he drove to the school early, parked in the same spot, eyes on every vehicle that approached. Parents arrived, kids loaded into cars, and Nora emerged right on schedule. She saw the truck and headed over, but halfway across the parking lot she stopped. Garrett followed her gaze. Dalton stood at the fence line 50 yards away just watching. He wasn't doing anything illegal, wasn't on school property, just standing on a public sidewalk, hands in pockets, that same smirk visible even at a distance. Nora's face had gone pale. She looked at Garrett, then back at Dalton, and Garrett saw the moment she understood that whatever was happening wasn't random, wasn't coincidence, was about her. He got out of the truck and walked toward her, keeping his body between Nora and Dalton, put a hand on her shoulder and guided her back to the vehicle. She climbed in without speaking, and Garrett pulled out of the lot, watching Dalton recede in the rearview mirror. Nora's voice was small. Who was that man? Garrett's hands tightened on the wheel. The truth would scare her. A lie would make it worse when she found out. Someone I used to know. He's angry about something that happened a long time ago. What happened? His brother died. He blames me. She absorbed that, staring out the window. Did you kill his brother? No, but I was there when it happened. I was in charge. And when you're in charge, everything that happens is your responsibility. That's not fair. Fairness doesn't matter. Responsibility does. They drove in silence until they were almost home. Then Nora, barely audible, is he going to hurt us? Garrett wanted to say no, wanted to promise her safety, certainty, the kind of protection fathers were supposed to provide. But Rebecca had taught him not to lie to their daughter, not about the things that mattered. I'm not going to let that happen. It wasn't the same as no, and Nora was smart enough to hear the difference. At home, he made her stay in the living room while he checked every closet, every window, the basement and garage. Satisfied the house was clear, he locked the doors and pulled the curtains. Nora sat on the couch watching him. We're prisoners now. We're careful now. For how long? Until this is over. When will that be? Garrett didn't have an answer. That night he called Jenny, Rebecca's sister. She lived 2 hours north, had a farm with horses and space and distance from whatever was happening here. He explained the situation in broad strokes, asked if Nora could stay with her for a few days. Jenny agreed without hesitation. Bring her up tomorrow. She can help with the horses, get some air, clear her head. Garrett thanked her and went upstairs to Nora's room. Found her packing a bag before he'd even asked. How'd you know? She didn't look up. Because you've been thinking about it since we got home, I can tell. I need you somewhere safe while I handle this. I don't want to leave. I know. This isn't fair. I know that too. She zipped the bag and turned to face him, and he saw Rebecca in her expression. The same determination, the same refusal to accept things she couldn't change. Promise me you'll be okay. I promise. You're lying again. I'm being realistic. There's a difference. She hugged him sudden and fierce, and he held her like she might disappear if he let go. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. Don't do anything stupid. I'll do my best. Thursday morning, they loaded her bag into the truck and drove north through fog so thick the road disappeared 10 feet ahead. Nora slept most of the way, or pretended to, and Garrett let her have the fiction. Jenny met them at the door with hugs and coffee and the kind of easy warmth that came from never having to wonder if someone was watching from the tree line. Garrett stayed for lunch, helped Nora settle into the guest room, then made himself leave before he talked himself into staying. The drive home felt longer than the drive up, and the house was too quiet when he walked through the door. His phone rang before he'd gotten his jacket off. Unknown number. He answered without thinking. Dalton's voice cheerful and mocking. Dropped off your daughter, smart move. Wouldn't want her caught in the crossfire. Leave her out of this. She's already in it. You made sure of that when you left my brother to die. Vincent volunteered for rear guard. He knew the risks. You had a choice. Extract the team or go back for him. You chose wrong. I chose 8 lives over 1. That's not wrong, that's math. That's murder. Garrett closed his eyes. This argument had played in his head 10,000 times over 9 years. Every version ended the same way, with Vincent dead and Garrett carrying the weight. What do you want, Dalton? I want you to suffer. I want you to lose everything the way I did. Brother, career, family. And when you've got nothing left, when you're hollowed out and broken, then maybe you'll understand what you took from me. I didn't take anything from you. You threw it away yourself. Because I had nothing to live for. Vincent was all I had, and you killed him. The line went dead. Garrett stood in the empty house and felt the walls closing in. Dalton wasn't interested in conversation, wasn't interested in truth or justice or anything rational. He wanted revenge, and revenge didn't follow rules, didn't respond to logic, didn't care about collateral damage. The only way to stop him was to remove the threat entirely. And removing the threat meant becoming exactly what Dalton wanted him to be. Friday morning, Garrett drove to Bryn's apartment, found her struggling to get groceries up the ramp, bags balanced awkwardly on her lap while she wheeled one-handed. He helped without asking permission, carried everything inside, helped her unpack. She made coffee and they sat at her kitchen table, not talking, just existing in the same space. After a while, she broke the silence. He came by last night. Garrett's head snapped up. Dalton. Didn't give his name. Just knocked on my door around 10, asked if I was the girl from the café. I didn't answer, but he knew I was here. Stood outside talking through the door for 5 minutes. Said you'd caused a lot of trouble. Said people who helped you tended to regret it. Did you call the police? They came, took a statement, said the same thing as before, without proof of intent, they can't do anything. Garrett's hands curled into fists. I'm sorry, this is because of me. Don't. Her voice was sharp. Don't apologize for defending someone. He's the problem, not you. I made you a target. He made me a target. You just happened to notice. They sat in silence until the coffee went cold. Then Bryn wheeled to the window and looked out at the street below, voice quiet but steady. My accident wasn't an accident. Not entirely. I was on a construction site inspecting work for a client. Someone had loosened the railing on the scaffold. I fell 20 feet onto concrete, broke my spine in 3 places. Garrett waited, letting her set the pace. They investigated, found evidence of sabotage but couldn't prove who. My partner at the firm benefited most, got my clients, my projects moved into my office before I was out of the hospital. But the lawyers said circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. You think he did it? I know he did. But knowing and proving are different things, and I was too broken to fight. Spent 2 years in physical therapy, learning to live like this. By the time I had energy for anything else, he'd moved to California, and the case was cold. She turned from the window. I'm telling you this because I understand. Sometimes the world hands you something unfair, and no amount of being right makes it different. You can spend your life fighting it, or you can adapt and keep moving. But you don't get to do both. Which did you choose? I'm still deciding. Garrett stood to leave, and at the door she called after him, "Whatever you're planning, don't let him turn you into something you're not." He drove home thinking about that, about the line between protecting and becoming, about whether there was a version of this where everyone walked away whole. His phone rang. Hayes. "Found Dalton. Or rather, he found us. Walked into the station an hour ago, filed a harassment complaint against you. Says you've been stalking him, threatening him, won't leave him alone." Garrett's laugh was bitter. "That's insane." "I know, but he's got a lawyer now, and the lawyer's making noise about restraining orders and police harassment. I need you to stay away from him, Garrett. Completely away. Don't respond to calls, don't engage, don't even look at him wrong. Because if this goes legal, you need clean hands." Garrett thanked him and hung up, understanding the game Dalton was playing. Create a paper trail. Establish himself as the victim. Make sure that when things finally escalated, the story was already written. Saturday morning came gray and heavy. Garrett drove to the gym he never used anymore and worked the heavy bag until his knuckles bled through the wraps. Pushed until his arms wouldn't lift, until the violence in his chest had somewhere to go that wasn't Dalton's face. In the locker room checking his phone, he found 3 missed calls from an unknown number and 1 voicemail. Dalton's voice calm and reasonable. "Meet me tonight, 8 p.m., the old warehouse on Porter Street, just you and me. We finish this like men, no lawyers, no cops. You don't show, I go to your sister-in-law's farm tomorrow. Your choice." The message ended. Garrett played it again, listening for background noise, anything that might indicate location or intent. Found nothing except the implicit threat that left him no choice at all. He called Hayes, got voicemail, left a message explaining the situation. Then he drove home and unlocked the safe in the garage. The SIG felt heavier than he remembered. The warehouse squatted at the edge of the industrial district, a relic from when manufacturing still meant something in New Hampshire. 3 stories of red brick and broken windows surrounded by chain-link fence, with gaps large enough to drive through. Garrett arrived 40 minutes early and parked 3 blocks away, approaching on foot through shadows that pooled between streetlights. The building had been condemned for asbestos removal that never happened, left to rot, while developers argued over permits and zoning variances. Perfect place for a meeting nobody wanted witnesses to. Perfect place for things to go wrong. Garrett circled the perimeter, twice cataloging exits and sightlines. North entrance chained but corroded, would break with pressure. East side had a loading dock metal door hanging crooked on one hinge. South wall backed against wood's natural cover, but also concealment for ambush. West faced Porter Street, exposed too much light. He chose the loading dock and slipped inside. The interior smelled like mold and rust, decades of neglect compacted into air thick enough to chew. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting geometric shadows across concrete floors littered with debris. Industrial shelving lined the walls, empty except for pigeon nests and spray paint tags, declaring territory in languages Garrett didn't speak. He moved through the space, methodically clearing corners, checking for movement. Found evidence of homeless encampments in the northwest corner, sleeping bags, empty bottles, a shopping cart filled with aluminum cans. Nobody present. Probably scattered when they heard someone coming. The main floor opened into a central atrium, where forklifts had once maneuvered pallets between loading zones. 3 stories of catwalks ringed the space railings, missing in sections grated floors that would telegraph footsteps to anyone below. Tactical nightmare. Too many angles, too many positions of advantage. Garrett positioned himself center floor back to a support column that would stop most calibers, gave him 360 awareness, and forced anyone approaching to cross open ground. The SIG rode heavy in the small of his back, tucked under his jacket, round-chambered, but safety engaged. Insurance he hoped he wouldn't need. 7:53 by his watch, 7 minutes early. He waited. At 7:59, footsteps echoed from the east entrance. Multiple sets, at least 3 people. Dalton appeared first, silhouetted against streetlight, bleeding through the doorway, flanked by the 2 men from the café. Jax, the big one, moved like a linebacker who'd taken too many hits, slow, but powerful, dangerous if he got hands on you. Penn the ferret compensated for size with twitchy energy, hands never still, eyes darting. Dalton walked forward until he stood 20 feet from Garrett, close enough to talk, far enough to react. He wore the same leather jacket and carried himself with the false confidence of a dying man who'd stopped caring about consequences. Punctual, I appreciate that. Military discipline. Garrett stayed silent. Not much for conversation tonight. That's fine. Let's keep this simple. Dalton gestured to his companions. Jax and Penn are here to make sure we both play fair. No guns, no knives, just you and me settling old business. There's no old business to settle. Vincent's death wasn't murder. It was war. Your war. Your mission. Your orders. He died following them. He died being a Marine. That's what Marines do. They hold the line so others can make it home. Dalton's expression hardened. Don't lecture me about what Marines do. I was a Marine before they threw me out. Before everything fell apart because my brother was gone and nobody gave a shit except me. Vincent wouldn't have wanted this. You don't know what he would have wanted. You left him to die. The words landed like blows, and part of Garrett felt them hit home. Because Dalton wasn't completely wrong. Vincent had volunteered for rear guard, yes, had insisted on staying when Garrett ordered him to fall back. But Garrett had accepted that sacrifice because the math made sense, one life weighed against 8. Utilitarian calculus that worked on paper, but left ghosts in the dark hours when accounting didn't help. I think about Vincent every day. Visit his grave every month. I don't forget what he did or what it cost. Dalton's laugh was broken glass. You visit his grave? That's supposed to mean something. That's supposed to make me forgive you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to stop using his death as an excuse for this. This Dalton spread his arms. This is justice. This is you finally understanding what you took from me. Movement on the catwalk above Penn, circling to a better angle. Jax shifted weight, telegraphing intent. Garrett tracked both without moving his head, peripheral vision, catching the setup even as Dalton kept talking. You know what I realized in prison? 5 years I had to think about it, figure out what bothered me most. Wasn't that Vincent died? People die. That's war, like you said. What bothered me was that you got to walk away, got to quit, go home, play dad, build your nice, quiet life while I fell apart. You didn't suffer. You didn't lose anything that mattered. I lost my wife to cancer, not because someone made a choice that killed her, not because someone decided her life mattered less than mission success. That's not what happened with Vincent. That's exactly what happened. You chose mission over man, and then you got to live with it while my brother rotted in a grave 6,000 miles from home. Garrett's fingers curled at his sides, forcing himself to stay calm. Dalton was baiting him, pushing buttons, trying to manufacture the confrontation that would justify whatever came next. The smart move was to walk away, refuse engagement, let Hayes and the legal system handle this. But Dalton had threatened Nora, had shown up at her school, sent photographs, made crystal clear that backing down wouldn't end anything. What do you want, Dalton? You want me to fight you. You want me to say you're right that I'm a murderer. What happens after? Does Vincent come back? Do you get your life back, or does this just keep going until one of us is dead? I want you to hurt, really hurt, the way I hurt. I do hurt. I've carried Vincent's death for 9 years. It doesn't go away because I built a life around it. Not enough. You still have a daughter, still have a future. I want you to know what it feels like to lose that. The temperature in the warehouse dropped 20 degrees. Garrett's voice went flat, emptied of everything except the promise underneath. If you touch my daughter, there's no place you can hide. No prison sentence long enough. No amount of time that makes you safe. Do you understand me? Dalton smiled sharper now. There it is. The real Garrett Ashford. The one who puts bullets in people when they threaten what's his. I was starting to think you'd gone soft. I went sane. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, you look the same as you did overseas. Same cold calculation. Same willingness to kill if the situation requires it. You just dress it up nicer now. Garrett couldn't argue because Dalton was right. The instincts never went away. The training never faded. He could assess threat and neutralize it faster than conscious thought. And part of him, the part that had kept him alive through 16 years of operations, wanted to end this right now. Wanted to cross the 20 feet between them and make sure Dalton never threatened anyone again. But that part of him was exactly what got Vincent killed. The cold math that said one death was acceptable if it saved others. The logic that turned people into variables in an equation where the answer was always written in blood. He'd walked away from that life specifically because he couldn't be both soldier and father. Couldn't switch between the man who made those calculations and the man who braided his daughter's hair before school. I'm not here to fight you. Dalton's eyebrows rose. No. Then why come? Because you threatened Nora. And I need you to understand that whatever happened with Vincent, whatever you think I owe you, she's not part of it. Leave her alone and we can talk. Keep pushing, and this ends the only way it can. Is that a threat? It's a boundary, one you need to respect. Or what, you'll kill me like you killed my brother. I didn't kill Vincent. You let him die. Same thing. The argument was circular, infinite, impossible to win, because they were arguing about different things. Dalton wasn't interested in truth. He was interested in pain and revenge and making someone pay for a loss that had broken him beyond repair. Garrett tried a different approach. Vincent wrote you letters from overseas. Did you read them? Dalton's expression flickered. What? His letters. He talked about you, worried about you. Told me once that you were the reason he'd enlisted, that he wanted to be someone you could be proud of. Don't. Dalton's voice cracked. Don't you dare talk about him like you knew him. I did know him. Not as well as you, but enough to understand what kind of man he was. And I'm telling you, he wouldn't want this. Wouldn't want you destroying yourself over his death. You don't get to tell me what my brother would want. Then listen to what he actually said. He wrote you a letter the day before he died, gave it to me, told me to make sure you got it if he didn't make it back. That stopped Dalton cold. You're lying. I'm not. It's in a safe deposit box in Virginia. First National Bank in Arlington, box number 847, registered under my name. Letter inside addressed to Dalton from his brother. Vincent Voss, killed in action 9 years ago. Dalton never got it. Dalton stared at him, something vulnerable breaking through the rage. What does it say? I don't know. Never opened it. Wasn't addressed to me. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then Dalton's face hardened again, walls slamming back into place. Nice try, but I'm not falling for some bullshit manipulation. It's not manipulation, it's the truth. And you can have it whenever you want. All you have to do is stop this. Walk away. Let me get the letter and give it to you, and we never see each other again. And if I don't, then we finish this right here and one of us doesn't leave. Penn whistled from the catwalk. Boss, we doing this or what? Dalton ignored him, eyes locked on Garrett. You really think Vincent's letter is going to fix this? Going to make me forget 9 years of blaming you? No, but it might help you remember who Vincent actually was instead of the version you've built in your head. Dalton's hand went to his jacket pocket, pulled out something small and metallic. Not a gun, a flask. He unscrewed the cap and drank long pull that made his throat work. When he lowered it, his eyes were wet. I've been dying for 6 months. Liver failure. Too much of this. He shook the flask. And not enough reason to quit. Doctors say I've got maybe 8 months if I'm lucky. 4 if I'm not. The revelation landed like a gut punch. Suddenly the recklessness made sense, the escalation, the willingness to burn everything down. Dalton wasn't planning for tomorrow because he didn't have many tomorrows left. I'm sorry. Are you relieved that the problem's solving itself? I'm sorry you're in pain, and I'm sorry Vincent's not here to help you through it. But using the time you have left to destroy other people isn't going to save you. Wasn't trying to save myself. Was trying to make sure you suffered before I go. Make sure someone paid for what I lost. Vincent already paid, and you're about to pay more than anyone should have to. Don't make this worse by dragging innocent people down with you. Dalton took another drink, wiped his mouth. Your daughter's not innocent. She's leverage. Same way Vincent was leverage when they ambushed our position. They knew we wouldn't leave him. Knew we'd try to extract, knew it would cost us. The comparison was obscene, and Garrett felt rage building in his chest like pressure behind a dam. But showing it would be giving Dalton exactly what he wanted. Nora is 12 years old. She's never hurt anyone. Never made a choice that cost someone their life. Using her to get to me doesn't honor Vincent's memory. It just proves you've become something he'd be ashamed of. The words cut deeper than Garrett intended. Dalton flinched like he'd been slapped, and for a moment the facade cracked completely. Garrett saw the broken man underneath, sick, grieving, terrified of dying alone with nothing but anger to show for his life. Then the mask returned harder than before. Maybe Vincent would be ashamed. But he's not here to judge me. You made sure of that. Penn called down again. Boss, seriously, we doing this? Dalton looked up at him, then at Jax, positioned near the exit. Yeah, we're doing this. He dropped the flask and pulled something else from his pocket. Not a weapon, a phone. He held it up so Garrett could see the screen. Video feed grainy but clear enough. Bryn's apartment. Interior shots showing her at the kitchen table working on her laptop, completely unaware she was being watched. See, Garrett, I learned something from you. About leverage. About making choices. Right now I've got someone outside her building. One call and he goes in. Does whatever I tell him to. And you get to live with that the way I've lived with Vincent. Garrett's world narrowed to the phone screen. You put a camera in her apartment. Installed it when I vandalized the ramp. Easy when you know what you're doing. This is insane. This is justice. You took someone I loved, I take someone you care about. I barely know her. But you protected her, rebuilt her ramp. That makes her matter, and that makes her useful. The calculation was coldly logical, psychotic, but coherent. Dalton had studied Garrett's patterns, identified weak points, created a scenario where any choice led to loss. Attack Dalton and he makes the call, Bryn gets hurt. Walk away and Dalton escalates anyway, because dying men don't negotiate. Garrett's hand moved toward the cig tucked in his waistband, instinct overriding thought. Don't! Dalton's voice was calm. I've got the call queued. Fingers on the button. You pull that gun and I push send before you clear leather. You're bluffing. You willing to bet her life on that? Garrett froze, hand hovering at his back. The warehouse had gone absolutely silent except for water dripping somewhere in the darkness. Penn watched from above, grinning. Jax had positioned himself to block the exit. This was the trap, the endgame Dalton had been building toward. Force Garrett into a choice where every option resulted in someone getting hurt, then watch him carry the guilt. It was elegant in its cruelty, but Dalton had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed Garrett came alone. Hayes stepped out of the shadows near the loading dock, service weapon drawn and steady. Dalton Voss put the phone down. Hands where I can see them. Dalton spun, phone still raised. Stay back, I'll make the call. No, you won't, because Officer Brennan is already at Bryn Caldwell's apartment, and the man you sent is in custody. Hayes moved forward, deliberate and controlled. It's over, Dalton. Put the phone down. You're lying. Check your texts. Your guy sent 3 messages asking for instructions. Know why he didn't call? Because we've got him and he's cooperating. Dalton looked at his phone, swiping through messages, and Garrett watched the reality sink in. The trap had been compromised. The leverage gone. Everything he'd built toward crumbling in real time. I had to tell Hayes the plan. Garrett's voice was quiet, almost apologetic. Couldn't risk you actually hurting her, so I called him before I came. Set up the intercept. Your guy got picked up 20 minutes ago trying to break into Bryn's building. Dalton's hand started to shake. You ruined it. You fucking ruined it. I stopped you from making it worse. Worse? How could it be worse? I'm dying. My brother's dead. I've got nothing left except making you hurt. The anguish in his voice was real and raw and heartbreaking. This wasn't a villain monologue. This was a man whose entire identity had collapsed around a single loss, who'd spent 9 years blaming someone else, because accepting responsibility meant accepting that Vincent's death had no meaning, no purpose, no cosmic justice to balance the scales. Hayes took another step. Dalton, I need you to put the phone down and get on the ground. We can sort this out, but I need you to comply right now. Or what, you'll shoot me, do me a favor. Save me 6 months of dying by inches. Nobody's shooting anyone. Just put the phone down. Dalton looked at Garrett and something shifted in his expression. The rage drained away, replaced by exhaustion so profound it seemed to age him a decade in seconds. Vincent wrote me a letter. Garrett nodded. The day before he died. Told me it was important that I had to make sure you got it. What if it just says goodbye? What if there's nothing in it that fixes this? Then at least you'll know. At least you'll have his actual words instead of the ones you've been imagining. Dalton's arm lowered slowly, phone dropping to his side. His whole body seemed to deflate like someone had cut the strings holding him upright. I don't want to die hating you. Then don't. Choose something else. Choose to remember Vincent the way he was instead of the way he died. Hayes was close now, within 10 feet. Dalton, I'm going to need you to... Everything happened in the span of a heartbeat. Penn moved on the catwalk, pulling something from his jacket, small, dark, unmistakably a pistol. Hayes pivoted, bringing his weapon up. Dalton saw the movement and lunged forward, not at Hayes, but at Garrett, shouting, "He's got a gun!" The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Penn fired from above, the round sparking off concrete 3 feet from Hayes. Return fire came instantly, Hayes' training overriding everything else. The bullet caught Penn in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He dropped the pistol and collapsed against the railing, clutching the wound. Jax charged from the exit, massive and fast despite his size. Hayes turned toward him, but Dalton was between them, and in that moment of confusion, Garrett moved. He intercepted Jax with a low tackle, using the bigger man's momentum against him. They hit the concrete together, impact driving air from both sets of lungs. Jax recovered first, throwing an elbow that caught Garrett above the ear. Stars exploded across his vision. Training kicked in. Garrett trapped Jax's arm, rotated into position, applied pressure to the elbow joint. Jax roared and tried to pull free, but the hold was locked, and forcing it meant dislocation. He went still, breathing hard, pinned. Hayes had Dalton face down, knee in his back, cuffing him with practiced efficiency. "Stay down, don't move, don't speak." "And mine." More sirens outside, backup arriving. Officer Brennan came through the loading dock with 2 uniforms, weapons drawn. She saw the scene and immediately moved to secure Penn, who was moaning on the catwalk, blood spreading across his shirt. Hayes looked at Garrett, still controlling Jax. "You good work. Yeah, you, Peachy. Let him up slow." Garrett released Jax and backed away, hands visible. Jax rolled to his knees, then stood with a uniform on each side. No fight left in him, just shock and the dawning realization that everything had gone sideways. Brennan called down from the catwalk. "Shoulder wound through and through. He'll live but needs an ambulance." Hayes nodded and spoke into his radio, requesting medical. Then he hauled Dalton to his feet and turned him around. Dalton's face was blank, all the anger burned out, leaving only hollowness behind. Vincent would have hated this. Dalton's voice was barely a whisper. "Would have hated what I became." Garrett stood a few feet away, breathing hard, tasting copper where he'd bitten his cheek during the tackle. "He would have wanted you to live. Really live. Not just survive until your body gave out. Too late for that. Maybe, but it's not too late to choose how you spend the time you've got." Hayes guided Dalton toward the exit, reading him his rights in a tone that managed to be both professional and gentle. Brennan escorted Jax out behind them. The warehouse emptied quickly, leaving Garrett alone in the space where everything had almost gone completely wrong. He stood there for a long moment, listening to his heartbeat, slow, feeling the adrenaline drain away. The cig was still tucked in his waistband, unfired, a weapon he'd prepared to use but hadn't needed. That felt significant somehow, though he couldn't articulate why. Outside, ambulances and police cars had turned Porter Street into a carnival of flashing lights. EMTs worked on Penn while Hayes supervised booking. Brennan approached Garrett with a blanket because apparently he was shaking and hadn't noticed. "You okay?" "Define okay," she smiled. "Alive, unshot, not in handcuffs. By tonight's standards, that's pretty good." He accepted the blanket and wrapped it around his shoulders, suddenly aware of how cold the night had gotten. Spring in New Hampshire was like that, warm during the day. Winter returning after dark to remind you it wasn't gone, just resting. Hayes finished with Dalton and walked over. "Need you to come to the station, give a statement. Whole thing's going to be a mess of paperwork. What happens to him? Conspiracy to commit assault, attempted kidnapping, bunch of other charges that'll stack up. Plus the gun charges from Penn. With his priors and the evidence we've got, he's looking at serious time. More than his liver's going to give him, probably. He's dying. 6 months at most." Hayes absorbed that without expression. "Makes sense. Explains the recklessness. Doesn't excuse it, but explains it." "Can you do me a favor?" "Depends on the favor." "There's a letter. Safe deposit box in Virginia First National Bank in Arlington. Box number 847, registered under my name. Letter inside addressed to Dalton from his brother. Vincent Voss killed in action 9 years ago. Dalton never got it." Hayes pulled out his notebook. "You want me to retrieve it? I want you to make sure he gets it, before he dies. Even if he's in prison, even if he doesn't want to see me. That letter's the only thing Vincent left him. He deserves to have it." Hayes wrote down the details, then looked up. "You're a better man than most, Ashford. I'm just trying to live with the choices I made. This is part of that. The statement took 3 hours at the station, going through every detail from the cafe incident to tonight's confrontation. Garrett told it straight, didn't minimize or exaggerate, let the facts speak for themselves. Hayes listened, took notes, asked clarifying questions that showed he'd done this enough times to know what prosecutors would need. When they finished, it was past midnight. Hayes walked Garrett to his truck and leaned against the driver's side door before Garrett could open it. Off the record, you handled tonight exactly right. Could have gone a dozen different ways, most of them bad. You kept your head, trusted me to do my job, didn't let it escalate further than it had to. Felt like barely controlled chaos. That's what it always feels like from inside. From outside, looked like a man who understood violence well enough to avoid it. Garrett thought about that during the drive home. About the difference between capability and action, between being able to hurt someone and choosing not to. He'd spent 16 years becoming someone dangerous, and the last 6 trying to become someone safe. Tonight had tested whether both could exist in the same person. The house was dark when he pulled into the driveway. He sat in the truck for a while, too exhausted to move, watching the stars through the windshield. Nora was safe at Jenny's farm 2 hours north, probably asleep with the guest room window open, so she could hear horses moving in the paddock. His phone buzzed. Text from Hayes spoke to Arlington PD. They'll retrieve the letter Monday. I'll make sure Dalton gets it. Garrett typed back, thank you. He climbed out and walked to the house, checking locks from habit before collapsing onto the couch. Sleep came fast and dreamless, his body finally convincing his mind to shut down. Morning arrived with pale light and bird noise. Garrett woke stiff and sore, every joint protesting. He made coffee and called Jenny. Garrett, everything okay? It's handled. I'll pick up Nora this afternoon, around 3. She'll be ready. Whatever happened, I'm glad you're all right. He spent the morning in the workshop, sanding the dining table he'd finished before all this started, preparing it for final coat of polyurethane. The work was meditative, requiring enough focus to quiet his mind. At 2:30, he loaded the truck and drove north. The farm appeared just after 3 white fences and rolling pasture horses, grazing in afternoon sun. Nora was in the paddock with Jenny's mare, brushing her coat. She saw the truck and waved, then jogged over. She climbed in and studied his face. Is it over? Yeah, it's over. The man who was watching me, in custody, won't be bothering us anymore. She nodded slowly. Was he really mad about his brother? He was, but his anger wasn't really about me. It was about loss and not knowing how to handle it. I understood that too late to help him. That's sad. Very sad. They drove in comfortable silence until Nora spoke again. I was scared, not just for me, for you. Garrett's chest tightened. I'll always do everything in my power to come back. That's a promise I can keep. She accepted that with a small nod. They stopped for dinner at the diner Nora liked. She ordered pancakes because breakfast food tasted better at dinner, and they talked about Jenny's horses, about school starting Monday, about whether she still wanted to repaint her room. I think I want to keep the stars and moons, she said quietly. They feel right, like Mom's still there somehow. Then we keep them. Back home, Nora went upstairs to unpack. Garrett stood at the kitchen window watching evening settle over the neighborhood. His phone buzzed. Text from Bryn Police told me what happened. Are you all right? He responded. Yes, you safe. Thank you for stopping him. Coffee this week, Wednesday, Riverside Café, 9 a.m. See you there. That night after Nora was asleep, Garrett stood in the backyard looking at stars. Same stars Vincent had seen from overseas. Same stars Dalton was seeing from a county cell. The universe didn't care about their small human dramas, didn't assign meaning or justice. It just was infinite and indifferent. But if the universe didn't assign meaning, then people could choose what mattered, what had value, what was worth protecting. He chose his daughter, chose building things instead of breaking them, chose forgiveness over revenge. And that choice, repeated every day, was enough. Inside the house was warm. Nora's breathing drifted down from upstairs, steady and safe. Garrett locked the doors and went to bed. The following Monday, Garrett received a text from Hayes' letter delivered to Dalton this morning. Medical eval confirmed late-stage liver failure. His lawyers petitioning for compassionate release to hospice. Judge hearing it Friday. Wednesday morning arrived bright and clear. Garrett walked into Riverside Cafe at 8:40 and found his corner booth. Tessa brought coffee without being asked. Bryn wheeled in at 9 on the dot. She looked lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted. Thanks for meeting me. Of course. She pulled out her laptop. I wanted to show you something. The playground design, I submitted it for the grant. Found out yesterday I won. She turned the screen toward him. Rendering of a playground with ramps instead of stairs, sensory panels at wheelchair height swings with supportive harnesses. This is incredible. Construction starts this summer, right here in town. Kids who need spaces that include them instead of excluding them will finally have somewhere to go. Garrett looked at the design and thought about Vincent's letter, about Dalton choosing destruction, about how grief could either break you or reshape you into something new. When it's done, I'd like to help build it. I'm pretty good with wood. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. They talked until her coffee went cold, easy conversation that required no walls. When she finally said she needed to get to work, Garrett walked her to her car. Will I see you here again Saturday mornings? Every Saturday, it's tradition. Good, I'll be here too. That afternoon, Garrett's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He opened it cautiously. I read Vincent's letter. He told me to forgive you. Said holding anger would poison me worse than any enemy could. Said you were a good man who made hard choices and he was proud to serve under your command. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I'm going to try. For him. Dalton Garrett read it 3 times, then saved the message. Outside, the neighborhood continued its rhythm. Kids playing dogs, barking the sound of a lawnmower starting up. Life in all its messy complexity, refusing to pause for anyone's grief or guilt or redemption. He didn't text back. The message wasn't asking for a response. It was offering closure or the beginning of it. Upstairs, Nora called down, Dad, can you help with math? Be right there. He climbed the stairs, choosing the present over the past. Nora sat at her desk surrounded by worksheets, pencil between her teeth in concentration. Fractions. I hate fractions. Fractions are just division in disguise. That doesn't make them better. He pulled up a chair and worked through the problems with her until the concepts clicked and frustration became understanding. When she finished the last problem, she high-fived him like they'd conquered something significant. Maybe they had. That Saturday, Garrett took Nora to her soccer game. She scored a goal and he cheered loud enough to embarrass her. Afterward, they got burgers and talked about nothing important. At home, she went upstairs to do homework while Garrett stood in the backyard, watching clouds move across late afternoon sky. His phone was in his pocket, silent. No threats, no calls, no emergencies. Just an ordinary Saturday in an ordinary life that felt extraordinary specifically because it was his. The kind of life worth fighting for. The kind of life worth choosing over and over every single day. Nora appeared at the back door. Dad, Emma wants to know if I can sleep over next weekend. Yeah, that's fine. Really, you're not going to make it weird? I'm going to try not to. She grinned and disappeared back inside. Garrett stayed in the yard a moment longer, feeling spring warmth on his face, listening to his daughter's laughter drift through open windows. Somewhere across town, Dalton was dying in a hospital bed, reading his brother's words for the 100th time. Somewhere in Virginia, Vincent's grave stood peaceful and still. And here in this moment, Garrett was exactly where he needed to be. The world didn't owe him peace, didn't promise easy answers or clean resolutions, but it offered moments like this ordinary quiet, perfect in their imperfection. He walked inside and closed the door behind him, choosing what came next, the same way he'd chosen what came before. One day at a time, one choice at a time. One moment of being the father his daughter needed and the man he'd decided to become. It was enough. It would always be enough.